this next clip is going to be 3 minutes, okay? And the topic here is dealing with Calvinism as being a movement that was started by John Calvin. And to me, that sounds similar to like saying that Taz Russell started, which one he started? Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses? I can't remember. And also Joseph Smith started that movement. Okay, so he's most definitely making it like a cult. Okay, when he's saying John Calvin created this movement, and then also too, he also brings another character as well too, Martin Luther. So to me, it seems like he's setting these two at odds. You may not see it like that, I don't know, but to me it just seems like, okay, Martin Luther means Reformation, John Calvin means something totally different. He comes in with something new, and there's something new will not be in this particular clip, this 3-minute clip, but it will be in our the one after that. He wants to say that Martin Luther and John Calvin had different ideas. Now, everybody had different ideas, okay? Even today, there's some people that have, a lot of theologians and preachers have different ideas. That doesn't mean that because you have to understand, on the essentials, they had unity, because that's what's make us Christians. That was it. But then in non-essentials, there was liberty, and then in all things, charity. So when you have Martin Luther, when it came to justification by grace alone, John Calvin and Martin Luther were in agreement there. When it came to predestination, double predestination, positive and negative view, they were in agreement with that as well, like I mentioned before, just maybe for two different reasons that they would come to that conclusion of predestination. Also, one thing that they did differ on was the Lord's Supper. How is Christ present at the Lord's Supper? So they differed there. That was a different matter of fact. To the essentials, John Calvin did not say anything that Martin Luther hadn't already said. And then also what Martin Luther had said, he was saying, he didn't say nothing new that Augustine had said, okay? And Augustine, nothing more than what Paul had said. So you have this layers upon layers of these men God used just to expound his word, and they wrote. And John Calvin, as far as, well, he didn't start this movement, okay? Because it's not really a movement. It's not a religion. It is a school of thought. It is theology, okay? It's your way of, it's the glasses you wear when you are, the sovereignty of God, sovereign grace becomes a center of attention for you. Justification is by faith alone and grace alone, okay? It's a work of God. It's monergism. These are things that kind of say Calvinism or Reformed theology. It's theology. It's a way of teaching. It's not a religion or a movement or a and we also, it's not going to be just a tulip either. And I think it is one of the pillars, most definitely. The 5 points as themselves become one pillar. The sovereignty of God is a pillar. The doctrines, well, actually, the doctrines of grace. I should call it the doctrines of grace is a pillar, you know. And there's, of course, other pillars, right? Covenantal theology. The deity of Christ. I mean, of course, that's part of Orthodox Christianity. I mean, you got to believe that to be a Christian, to have a seat at the table. So let's go and listen to this 3-minute clip here. And then I'll probably get some more after. Oh, let me mention this too before we said. He's going to say that John Calvin wrote his Institutes of the Christian life, his Institutes, at the ripe old age of 26. Now, his first edition he did. But he would go on to write other editions. I think it was 4 editions in total. He was almost 50 when he finished his last edition. And it would be called the definitive edition that everybody would translate in, you know, into English and different other languages. Because he wrote it in French. Now his ripe old age of 26 version edition was only written in Latin. So when someone writes in Latin during that time, their audience was academic wise. It wasn't for the common people. It was probably for somebody that had some money, somebody that was rich, somebody who was very learned, somebody that you want to debate or something like that. It would not be written for somebody who's a lay person. Okay, but his second and third edition, or at least his last two for sure, was written in French. So therefore, those were kind of where, similar as though he's opening it up and addressing certain things. And matter of fact, the way he wrote it almost became a standard of writing, because you'll see it in the canons of Dort. You'll see it in other confessions, catechisms and everything. And don't be afraid of catechism. Catechism is like instruction or teaching. For example, it's in question answer form. Ask a question, answer. Like for instance, who made me would be a question. And especially if you teaching this to your kids, they would say, God made me. And then you would also ask them, what else did God make? God made all things. Then you would say, why did God make you in all things? God made me in all things for his own glory. And then one from the shorter catechism as well. I'm going to give you one of those as well. What is a chief end of man? The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Okay, that's a shorter catechism. And there's other, and Martin Luther even had a shorter catechism dealing with the 10 Commandments, the Lord's Prayer. It says, what does hallowed be thy name mean, or something like that. It's breaking up every part of the Lord's Prayer, and it's supposed to be memorized by your kids and taught in the family and sometime at the church. Charles Spurgeon, one of the famous preachers, he did catechisms as well. So let's feel like I'm getting off topic here. So let's go ahead and listen to this quote, or this clip here, this 3-minute clip.
As free moral agents with the right to choose. Now, Calvinism is a movement that was actually developed by a French theologian named John Calvin. He was born in 1509, and he died in 1564. Now, as I'm getting into this message, I will tell you it will be impossible for you to get everything that I'm going to give you. I'm going to try. But I've got some things that we have to discuss and get into, but I'm going to try to slow down as much as possible. But I want to get through everything that I have to share with you tonight. But you can get it sent to your email electronically, and you can listen to it, or you can get the hard copy CD. Well, Calvin, he was a lawyer who later became a preacher or pastor, actually in Geneva, Switzerland. Calvin produced a lot of commentaries. Matter of fact, several commentaries he produced, and probably his most known work was the Institutes of the Christian Religion, which he published at the ripe old age of 26. John Calvin and Martin Luther were literally contemporaries. Most of us in here have probably heard of Martin Luther. If you have, slip your hand in the air if you've heard of Martin Luther. All right, hands all over the building. All right, prior to the night, how many of you have heard of John Calvin? Also, slip your hand in the air. All right, so not as many, but several of you, but not as many as have heard of Martin Luther. Well, they were contemporaries, except that Martin Luther was just a little over 25 years older than John Calvin. As a matter of fact, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church door, John Calvin at that time was only 8 years of age. Well, of course, Calvin had his following, and of course, Martin Luther had his following. And although they both were well known, and by the time he wrote the Institutes of the Christian Religion, at that particular time, when Calvin wrote, he was 26, and then you had Luther, who was already in his 50s. And by the way, Luther, even after he had written this, Luther only had about 10 more years left, and then he was out of here. And so even though they were contemporaries, they never met. They never met. And they did have some doctrinal differences. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Thesis on the Wittenberg Castle Church.
Oh yeah, let's stop there. Now you probably got a question that goes something similar to this. What is his point with all this, right? What is his point? I'm not sure what his point is. I think he's rambling on and on and on and on and on and on about stuff that's very irrelevant, because I'm not even sure what's the point. Okay, so of course I think I shouldn't be speculating, so let me stop with my speculation. But it seems as though there's not much point to what he's saying. He's giving this, he was 10 years old when he nailed it to 95 Thesis to the Wittenberg Castle thing. And then he's even going to, and I think part of his point is to say, basically, I know church history, you know. So let's stop there and let's deal with, and we have already kind of dealt with all this, but I did want to say, basically, I'm thinking people like, whatever, he was 10 years old at that time. Oh yeah, when he was 26, he did that. Martin Luther was 50 by then, you know, and all this kind of stuff. So, but basically he's trying to separate John Calvin from Reform, from the Reformation, or at least put him as somebody who is very foreign, and basically the Reformation was already on the way, and he's going to say that too, because we're going to have to talk about that. We're going to have to talk about, because it's going to be predestination, and we're probably just going to listen to him say it, and I'll probably use one of his famous sayings in this, in one of his clips. Wow. Okay, I might have a comment. I'm not sure. So, just so we kind of mentioned how I kind of got this. How did I even get this sermon, or why did I even know he preached this sermon? So someone was listening to, randomly just picked one of his sermons, and he heard him mention that he preached this sermon. So we found somebody at the church that was willing to send us a link to it, and so I downloaded, and that's how I got the sermon. Okay. And I was very grateful to that person for doing that for me. And they did, he did say one thing that was really true, that wasn't too deceiving, I guess. They'd never met. Martin Luther and John Calvin never met. They did write, well, John Calvin wrote some correspondence to Martin Luther, asking him some questions, but they both spoke very well of each other when they would write. However, and Calvin adored Luther. Okay, he adored him, and I think it was actually mutual there. He was writing to John Calvin would write to Luther, but one of Luther's buddies, thought that he always intercepted the letters and he never got them. So they never got a chance to communicate with each other. And but I was listening to a church history clip before, and he did mention that Martin Luther and Zwingli and Martin Luther was debating actually on the Lord's Supper. And John Calvin was invited. He couldn't make it. He had a previous engagement or something. He couldn't make it. He was providentially hindered, basically. And so they went to the debate. They left that debate more zealous for what they believe in the first place. And there was a comment mentioned in that church history clip that later on, Martin Luther did get a chance to, in writing, hear John Calvin's take on the Lord's Supper, how Christ is present in the Lord's Supper. And he said, if John Calvin was present, he might have changed his mind. He probably would have helped Zwingli and Martin Luther come to an agreement. But it was just providentially hindered. God did not, for whatever reason, didn't make it happen. So that's a little church history there for you. And that is a little bit more relevant in this whole thing than what he was talking about here. Like I said, I don't even know the point in it. Okay. And that would be it. So let's look forward to the next. What's the point of that too? Okay.